As we get settled in, we'll go ahead and play our 8 Principles video.
The Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola, the 8 Principles.
Number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
Number 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregation.
Number 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
Number 5, the right of conscience and the use of democratic process within our congregation and in society at large.
Number 6, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
Number 7, respect for the interdependent web of existence,
of which we are all a part.
Number 8, active commitment to dismantle racism and other oppression in ourselves and our institutions.
Good morning. My name is Ian Briggs. My pronouns are he and him, and I'll be your service leader for today. Whether it's your first time here or 1,000th time here, whether you're out here in person or watching online, thank you for being here. It's glad to see all of your faces here this morning. If you are looking for a community, friendship, fellowship, a third space, a new home, you found it here. And no matter who you are or where you're from, just know that each and every one of you are loved. If you are new here, though, just a quick few things about our service. We are a lay-led congregation. So if you're used to being at a traditional church or place of worship where you have a preacher or whoever says the service every week, not so much the case here. We always have someone different every week, whether from the Pensacola community or within these walls, right? And definitely adds a lot of variety to our services. You know, as y'all know, if you've been here multiple times, it's usually like some lecture, some educational. Sometimes we have discussion panels or musical shows like we did last week, which was very good. If you did not get a pamphlet, I don't have one to show off, but if you would like one, you are welcome to go look in the lobby around the credenza. Just has some info about our things. I'll get a little closer. Okay. Okay. Where was I? So yeah, there's a little pamphlet in the lobby, credenza, if you need that. What else is there? We also have a website, uupensacola.org, which has all the same information that you can view at any time. It gives us info about like upcoming worships and different events that are happening. So definitely something to check out from time to time and stay informed. All right. Also, after the service, we do have coffee and snacks. So if you want to join in with that, which you are obviously more than welcome to, you just go out this sanctuary, go right, take another right, immediately on your left, or just use your nose and follow the smell, right? All right, I think that covers all the welcoming stuff, so we'll go into announcements. But before I do that, just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, silence or turn off your phones, electronic devices, anything that can make a beep, boop, buzz, or anything like that. Don't want it to distract our speakers and all that stuff. All right. And for announcements, looks like I just have one. Don't see anything else. This will be pretty quick. So the Manna Food Bank is hosting a Super Bowl of caring event. Collections will be taken on Super Bowl Sunday, which is February 9th. So between now and then, please bring any and all canned goods you'd like to donate to Manna. We will drop them off after service. I would suggest on the 9th. And yeah, it's always to a good cause in the community. If you need more information, you can see Mary Beth Ramsey, which I see her right there. She's raising her hand, and she'll give you all the details about that. And again, I think that is the only announcement. All right. So we'll go ahead and start with some centering music, just to kind of get us into the vibe, as the kids say, right? Just to kind of get us back to normalcy after what a weird week for Pensacola, right? All the snowfall. If I'm being perfectly honest, that was the first time I've ever seen snow, and I just felt like a little kid seeing all of it. And I hope y'all were too. But to get us back into the usual things, we'll play some music, and as they play some music, look to your left, look to your right, say hi to your neighbor. What a better way to thaw yourself out from the cold than a warm smile, right? So we'll just enjoy some music for a little bit. Thank you. All right, now we'll go into our chalice lighting. So the chalice is a symbol of the UU faith, right? And I think to different people, it means different things. So for me, seeing the flame represents not only a source of warmth, warm us up from the cold and give us comfort. It's a source of light, right? For us to shine a path through the darkness so we can see where we need to go. And on a more physical level, just think of all the tiny little atoms that make up that flame. Think of those atoms are just teeny, tiny little specks. You can't even see it with your eye. But when they come together, they make a beautiful, bright light. And I like to think of us as something like that, coming together, no matter how different we may be, in our views and perspectives, we can act as a whole.
At this time, we're going to deviate a little bit from our routine, and yet this is a ritual that we have had for many, many years here at UUCP. We lost a member of our congregation this month, Evelyn Jackson, who was married to J.J. Jackson, and very strong supporters of UUCP together. They both, in their decline, continued to be visited by UUCP members on a regular basis. And eventually, JJ died a couple of years ago, and Evelyn has since deceased January 14th. She, in later stages, began to say, I don't want visitors. So that in of itself tells you a whole lot about Evelyn. She was well-spoken. She spoke out. She was a strong supporter of women's rights, a strong political activist. She definitely had an opinion and led many people in her ability to bring forth the importance of civil rights, women's rights, political rights. And she will be cremated. She has chosen to have her ashes spread at the beach. The actual ceremony is still pending as to how they will manage that. She and her family are in charge and have been in communication with our congregation. So I will light this one single candle today in honor of the light that she brought to us, the spark that we now still feel within us, whether you knew her or not.
Now for some opening words. They're from Theodore Parker, an American transcendentalist and reforming minister of the Unitarian Church. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living. All right, and if you're able and willing, if you please rise and we'll say the covenant together. All right. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another. And if you remain standing, we'll have our opening hymn is number 121 in your gray book, We'll Build a Land. right? Now is the time of our service where we call it Joys and Sorrows, where you have an opportunity as part of a community to come up and share briefly about something that's going on in your life, whether good or bad or maybe a mix of both. So if you want to go ahead and get lined up on either side, you'll come up and briefly share your name and what it is that's on your mind. But first, I'll light one candle for just the whole world, the big picture candle that just affects everybody, whether here in the United States, abroad. I think you get the idea of what's going on. Oh, and almost forgot, this part is not recorded or broadcast, so everything that's spoken in this room is retained in these walls with your own privacy. All right, I was told when I came in by Honored that the children were already in the room, so I'm just doing a quick scan if there's any little ones still in here. Maybe doesn't look like it, so we'll just, I know we usually sing it, but they're already gone, so we'll pretend you already sang it. All right, now this part of our service is offertory. As I said earlier, we're a lay-led congregation, which also means all of the contributions we have in this church come from you all within these walls. So we do have to pay the bills and stuff every now and then, so if you can, whether it's your time, talent, or of course treasure, we'll be more than happy to take any of your charitable donations. So we'll have our ushers come up and pass some baskets, and we'll play some music while that's going on. Alrighty. Well, today's speaker is, in fact, one of our very own. You know him, you've talked to him, you're friends with him. He's been a member here since, August 2023, so I guess that's about a year and a half or so. And if I'm not mistaken, this is his first time coming up and giving a presentation. So if y'all all would help me welcome up to the podium, Mark Swaney.
Well, pretty good turnout. Thanks for coming. I had a lot of fun doing this. I'll just take a moment to add a bit. I was astonished at the history that I was reading. I wound up reading a lot about it. And unfortunately, today I can only give you the high points. So here we go. The sketch history of the Unitarian Universalist churches involves discussions of theology and Christian church doctrine. It's necessary to discuss these topics as they were central to the origin and history of our UU churches. However, they are no way a part of our current UU church, at least in the USA. Our current UU churches have no specific religious doctrine which is required to be accepted by the members. We accept anyone who wishes to be a part of the church, regardless of their personal religious convictions or even lack of them. So if you're somewhat nervous hearing about religious dogma in the history of the UU church, fear not, it is only our past, not our present, that I'll be talking about today. However, there are strong common principles which do unite our present church with its long history, some of which you're about to hear. The UU church is derived from the Christian religion. originally separate groups, the Universalist churches joined with the Unitarian churches in 1961. The Universalists do not and did not believe in the existence of hell, the place of eternal punishment. They believe that everyone eventually will be saved in a Christian sense of the word. Unitarians of the past did not accept the doctrine of the Trinity, the doctrine of God in three persons, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Essentially, the Unitarian position then was that God is one and there is no other God. There were also other problems that the Unitarians had with the Orthodox doctrine established in the church councils in the 4th century. These two ideas, Universalism and Unitarianism, were present at the very earliest stages of the Christian faith, all the way back to the time immediately after the departure of Jesus. At that time, the Bible, the founding document of modern Orthodox Christianity, did not exist. Soon after Jesus left the earth, there grew up competing ideas about the nature of Jesus and of the afterlife. The early church fathers did not agree among themselves on these issues. The foundation of modern Orthodox Christianity occurred in 325 at the Council of Nicaea. The history surrounding the Council of Nicaea is a large subject we don't have time to go into today, but briefly, the Roman Emperor Constantine decided to force a unification of all the competing Christian ideas that existed in the Roman world at that time. To do this, he required all of the churches to send representatives to the city of Nicaea to debate and deliberate, and then finally come up with one set of Christian beliefs that all Christians would be required to accept. Obviously, the creation of one set of Christian beliefs that would be the official version was bound to leave out some popular ideas about Jesus and his teachings. Those ideas became heresy and were not tolerated. People who refused to give up these non-standard beliefs were called heretics, and many of them were persecuted. As is usual when a state sponsors censorship, these non-orthodox ideas did not disappear. They simply went underground, and they continued to have support among some Christians, but those ideas could not be publicly promoted without risking punishment. We will now fast forward to 1450. A man named Gutenberg printed the famous Gutenberg Bible in Latin. Prior to this time, practically no one outside of church officials had access to a copy of the Bible. As it was so expensive to produce one by hand, the cost was prohibitive. The invention of printing marks the beginning of public knowledge of the Bible. Only 4 or 5 decades after Gutenberg's press in Italy, the Italian Renaissance was allowing people to think new ideas about philosophy, and the philosophy of humanism began to circulate among educated people. In northern Italy, near Venice, small groups of people began to meet to discuss non-orthodox ideas regarding Christianity. By the early 16th century, due to numerous factors, the Reformation began, an earth-shaking change in the history of the Christian religion. As is well known, Martin Luther started the Reformation in 1517 with an attack on the sale of indulgences. It was the Reformation that finally allowed long-repressed ideas about Christianity to be openly discussed. But this was not what the Reformers had in mind when they broke away from the Roman Church. They did not intend that their Reformation would promote ideas that were outside the Orthodox Christian doctrine. It turned out that the Protestants were just as intolerant as the Catholics. In this environment, there was a man, Michael Servatius, whose execution for heresy in 1553 sparked the first organized public Unitarian Christian churches in Europe. Servatius was a highly intelligent and educated man who had published books questioning and denying the truth of the doctrine of the Trinity. His story involves more detail than is possible to relate in a short time. However, the bottom line is that he was arrested in Geneva and was convicted of heresy by Protestants who put him to death. I think it's important to know that he was convicted due to the actions of John Calvin, whose ideas about Christianity were repressive and intolerant. Calvin engineered the arrest and conviction of Servatius on charges of heresy and pushed for the death penalty. The execution was in reality a public torture murder. Servatius was condemned to be burned alive by slow fire. They burned him with green wood in order to extend his pain and suffering in the flames. It is reported that it took 30 minutes for him to die. Servatius was murdered because both Catholics and Protestants wanted to suppress his ideas. That plan failed spectacularly. After the execution of Servatius, many people were horrified at the cruelty of Calvin and began to speak out and write against intolerance in religion. One of the most important of these was a man named Laelius Socinus. Laelius Socinus was born in Italy and was a lawyer until he moved to Venice and began to study the writings of Servatius. After that time, he decided that the Orthodox position of the Catholic Church was not supported by the Scripture. He decried the execution of Servatius, and consequently he was suspect in the eyes of the Italian Inquisition. Unfortunately, Laelius Socinus died at the early age of 37, leaving behind not much more than some books and his writings, which were inherited by his nephew, Faustus Socinus. Faustus Socinus studied the writings of his uncle and adopted his ideas. The main principle that Faustus seized on was that reason was equal to Scripture as an authority in religion. Laelius and Faustus Socinus and others, through their published writings, initiated the first organized Unitarian religious movement, originally in Europe called Socinian. This religious movement lasted for more than 4.5 centuries and in later times became known as the Unitarian churches. Now we come to the founding of the first organized public Socinian churches in Europe, specifically in Poland. The Catholic Church was relatively weak in Poland at the time. When the Reformation came to Poland, it was strongly supported in Poland, and especially among the nobles and the aristocrats who were still quite powerful on their own lands. In 1555, the Polish Diet, their legislature, decreed that there would be freedom of religion in Poland, and by 1560, there were 160 non-Orthodox churches in Poland. Because of persecution in the western parts of Europe, many religious refugees traveled to Poland to escape the Catholic Inquisition. Among those refugees were Proto-Socinians from Italy. In 1559, a noble by the name of Jan Sieniski, if I'm pronouncing these words right, established broad religious freedom in his town of Rakow. An independent church was established there under the protection of his family. In 1572, that church had become the first organized Socinian church. For 60 years afterwards, Rakow was the center of Polish Unitarianism. A very important early Unitarian was a man named Biendrata. No time to speak a lot about him, but he was a very influential Unitarian in our history. He was a friend of Laelius and Faustus Socinus and had previously brought Faustus to Poland. In 1579, Biendrata invited Faustus Socinus to go with him to Transylvania, where another Unitarian church was established and survives to this day. However, we do not have time today to develop the history of that church. Faustus Socinus is as close to a founder of the Unitarian Church as I can imagine. He guided the church at Rakow. He wrote many works of religious content stating and supporting the Unitarian position. By the time of his death in 1604, the press in Rakow had turned out over 500 books and pamphlets, and there were at least 300 congregations. The Rakow church had schools, chapels, church property, and they sent missionaries all through Europe disseminating the religious ideals and principles of the Unitarian Church. One constant position of the Unitarian Church at Rakow was a plea for religious toleration, an emphasis on living a good moral life and respect for the use of rationality in interpreting the Bible. However, the Rakow Church did not last because in 1660, I'm going to find my place, Jan Casimir, the ruler of Poland, ordered the Unitarians to leave Poland. Under great hardship, most of the Polish Unitarian Church fled, losing all their property in the process, and they became religious refugees. They dispersed principally to Germany, Transylvania, and Holland. So began a new chapter in our history. At the time of the expulsion of the Unitarians from Poland, the Dutch Republic had just 12 years earlier succeeded in winning their independence from Catholic Spain. The Dutch became Calvinist Protestants. The Rakow refugees began to move into Holland from places to the east because the policy of the Dutch was more religiously tolerant than other places in Europe, and Unitarians collected there. Unitarians flourished in Holland with an atmosphere of toleration and liberal thought. There were Mennonites, Remonstrants, and other groups that entertained non-Orthodox religious beliefs. There never was a strong Unitarian leader or organized church in the Dutch Unitarian Church, but Holland was the place that was the source of English Unitarianism. We do not have time to delve deeply into English history. The part of British history that we are most concerned with is the 17th and 18th centuries. A man, John Biddle, born in 1615 in England. His father was a tailor, and the family was clearly not from the aristocratic group. Nevertheless, by the age of 19, John Biddle was a student at Oxford, and in 1641 he graduated from that university. Biddle was a specialist in the text of the Bible and could read the New Testament in Greek. After his study of the Bible, he concluded that there was no textual basis for the concept of the Trinity. He never changed his mind about that, in spite of several stretches in prison for heresy. All throughout the turbulent history of England during its Civil War, he continued to write and publish his beliefs. One of his publications was titled 12 Arguments Drawn Out of Scripture. Biddle died in 1662 at the age of 47 of a disease he contracted while in prison. Though Biddle's work did not produce a permanent church, it influenced later Unitarian ideas in England. Biddle's main concern was that Christians should lead a good moral life. He once said that no religion would benefit a bad man. In the interest of time, we must skip over several Unitarian heroes, and pick up the story of English Unitarian history with Theophilus Lindsey in the late 1700s. Lindsey was a minister in the Church of England, and during a time when there was considerable controversy within the church regarding the doctrine of the Trinity. The Church of England required ministers to subscribe to the Athanasian Creed as a condition of their position within the church, and also required that it be used in all church services. That creed contained a statement of belief in the doctrine of the Trinity. Because of this requirement, there were many individual churches that refused to subscribe to the Athanasian Creed. The issue was not just the requirement to state acceptance of that creed, but also the larger issue of freedom of conscience. Those churches that refused to agree to the creed split from the Church of England and were called non-subscribing churches or dissenters. Early in his ministry, Reverend Lindsey had doubts about the doctrine of the Trinity. As time went on, Lindsey's doubts grew until he came to the point where he did not think he could continue in the Church of England. In 1773, he sent his resignation to the bishop. He sold his property, traveled to London to found a Unitarian congregation. The next year, with borrowed money, he rented an auction room on Essex Street in London and held the first service of the Unitarian Church in England on April 17, 1774. Benjamin Franklin was present at that first meeting of the Unitarian Church in England. Franklin was there in London as a representative of the Massachusetts colony in America and often attended the Essex Church when he was in London. Lindsey died in 1808, but by 1810 there were 20 Unitarian churches in England. We now meet a friend of Benjamin Franklin, a famous scientist named Joseph Priestley. As a scientist, Priestley is credited with several important scientific discoveries. The most well-known is his discovery of oxygen. In spite of his scientific achievements, Priestley considered his scientific work to be merely his hobby. His main interest was in the Unitarian churches. He was a remarkable man and was involved in education, religion, science, and politics. He was a strong supporter of the American Revolution. Because of Priestley's controversial political and religious opinions, in 1791, a group of rioters in Birmingham, England, attacked Priestley's house and burned it to the ground, along with his library and all his notes and possessions. Because of the attacks, Priestley and his family relocated to London. In 1774, Priestley and his family moved to America, first living in Philadelphia, where he established a Unitarian church which is still in existence. He later moved to Northumberland, Pennsylvania, where he died in 1804. After Lindsley and Priestley succeeded in establishing Unitarianism in England, there were several developments which eventually resulted in complete freedom of worship for English Unitarians, and by 1900 there were 360 Unitarian churches in England. There were further developments in the Unitarian history in England. However, to save time, we must now move to history of Unitarian churches in the newly formed United States. Unitarianism in American colonies developed at about the same time as the American Revolution and were largely based in the New England colonies, but even before that happened, there were developments in the church in the colonies that led to the Unitarianism. In New England, the congregational churches were the successors of the 17th century Puritan and Pilgrim churches, which were historically Calvinist. A congregational church is one in which the political control of the church is entirely in the hands of its own members, unlike other Protestant denominations which have bishops or presbyters which have power over the individual churches. However, over time, those originally Calvinist churches gradually began to liberalize their beliefs. And when Massachusetts became a crown colony in 1691, the Puritans lost control of the colony. After that, liberal ideas from England slowly began to infiltrate into the colony. Long before the advent of organized Unitarianism in America, there were divisions between what we would call liberal and conservative Christians and the colonial Church of England. The split became obvious with the coming of the Great Awakening in 1734, a revivalist enthusiasm that basically sought to reinvigorate Calvinism in America. The liberal clergy did not like the Great Awakening because of its intensely emotional character. The liberal ministers preferred a more thoughtful and rational form of Christianity. At this point, it is worthwhile to consider the history of the Universalists. Universalism had a somewhat underground existence in Europe since the beginning of Christianity. However, there were no Universalist churches in Europe in the 18th century. Organized Universalism first developed in New England in the late 1700s, at about the same time as the Unitarians were organizing. Universalism has a very interesting history, but unfortunately there's not enough time to go over even the high points of that denomination. I would like an opportunity to talk about what I've learned about Universalism at some time in the future. They're a very important branch of non-Orthodox Christianity and have added much to the Unitarians whom they joined in 1961. Returning to the Unitarians, at King's Chapel in Boston, founded as an Anglican church in 1686, underwent a crisis during the American Revolution with the Loyalist members leaving for England. During that war, there was no rector or minister at King's Chapel. 3 years after the end of the war, in 1787, Theophilus Lindsay's revised prayer book was adopted by King's Chapel, and its new rector was James Freeman, who is described as the first avowed preacher of Unitarianism in the United States. Freeman was a rector of the King's Chapel until his death in 1836. King's Chapel is today a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Here I must stop. We're almost out of time, but I want to mention that in spite of many differences between the Unitarian churches of the past and those of the present, there are certain specific central aspects of Unitarianism that have not changed and continue to be important characteristics of Unitarianism. Briefly, I can state 4 main ideas which animate our current church and which are unchanged in our history. They are tolerance for all religious opinions. No one should be persecuted for their religious beliefs. The use of reason when interpreting the scriptures. We have intelligence, and it's not reasonable to assume that we must always adhere to religious ideas simply because they have been traditional. The adoption of humanism in the application of our beliefs. Humanism is the idea that we must be humane in our actions and never seek to harm others because of their religious beliefs or lack of them. And the emphasis on leading a good moral life rather than having the approved orthodox beliefs. Finally, I want to tell you that I've been frankly fascinated and overwhelmed with admiration for all the history of the Universalist and Unitarian churches, and I'm very proud to be a member of a church that never burned anyone at the stake. I would also be happy to discuss further the many other facts and fascinating stories that I did not have time to tell you today if anyone wants to talk to me about that. And thank you for coming and listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Mark. All right, if you're able to stand again, we'll do our closing hymn. Invite the choir back up here. This one, what is this one? This one is number 114, also in your gray book, Forward Through the Ages.
In unbroken
And here are our closing words. They're from John Murray, a minister and one of the founders of Universalism in the United States. Go out into the highways and byways. Give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it, let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach the kindness and everlasting love of God. Go in peace.